Thank you, man.
So let's say like in that childhood phase before you're like 10, what were you up to? If like, like were you involved in some like music in some way, like, or was it just, what kind of activities did a young one get up to?
Um, I mean, I guess I was like most. I can't. Nah, that's a lie. I wasn't like most kids. You know what I'm saying? Number one, as a first generation Haitian American, um, there was a lot of there were stigmas. There were
Yeah,
attacks. There were kind of, you know what I'm saying? There was like the idea of like, you know, Haitian boat people. You know what I'm saying? There was I have to say first and foremost, my father and by extension my mother um were politically active, and my father mostly still is politically active within the Haitian American community, right? So working with the Haitian diaspora. And so the differences for me was kind of like this real like instilling of a certain pride. There was a real education early on in terms of like who I was as a person and what I was descended from, and who and where we come from. Um, so my parents being politically active, you know, working with the Haitian community, my father for 30 or so years, probably more. Um, he and his friends ran a community, a nonprofit organization in service of the Haitian community, throughout the state of New York and the country at large.
that's
Um,
really that's really big, and
yeah,
not that's like you're also pretty privileged to have that. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, yeah, man,
to have parents like that involved, and that
yeah,
right, like I mean, like I call these privileges, and like
right,
they are right, like technically
yeah,
speaking,
yeah,
um, uh, tell us more. Hold on though. Finish what you
yeah,
were.
yeah. No, 100%. I mean, it was definitely it was there was definitely it was a privilege, you know what I'm saying? However, it wasn't, I don't know how much privilege someone feels as like a toddler, elementary school age kid, being the source of ridicule, with things like Haitian body odor and you know,
Yeah, I
you
was gonna
know,
help you get into that, right? Because
yeah,
right, like we grew up in the same city, right? So like
right,
you saying right that you're Haitian, and like I'm saying that's a privilege in the sense of like that your father was that involved
right,
in your community, right?
yeah,
Uh it might not have seemed evident because you were essentially like your dad was getting you clout amongst the community that was not the cool community, right?
mm,
Like Jamaicans got made fun of, and Jamaicans would make fun of Haitians. That's how
100%.
that's how far down the Caribbean rung Haitians
Yep,
were in the
yep,
city,
yep.
right? Where
Yo,
like,
that's two whole facts.
you know what I'm saying? So I
I didn't
know
even
that
know
it
any of
wasn't
that. I
like
didn't know any of that really.
Haitians and African immigrants were like probably the most like uh mocked and ridiculed in New York City in the
That's
80s
a
and the
hundred percent
90s.
fact. That
And
there was for a time being Haitian in this city was so rough. Um, that a lot of Haitians would I mean, some took it as far as to grow their hair out in dreads and things like that, and still do. But less so now as a means of kind of like hiding who they are. But the term Jafakin, right?
mhm.
Um, comes from like the days of my upbringing, you know what I'm saying, and the days of my youth where it was so ridiculed and so kind of like shameful to be Haitian that a lot of people would front like they were Jamaicans, and so that term Jamaican came from not me, you know what I'm saying, personally, because
Yeah,
the pride of who my people are and what we did in this world, and what we accomplished, which by the way has never been replicated ever again,
never.
in the history of man. Right? And we
Nope.
talking 1804 stand up, and hence where
Mm.
sometime my pen name comes into play. So there was a great sense of pride. Holden, your real question was kind of like what was going on and like what I was doing in my formative years, and a large part of my formative years was spent um in sort of like the community center that my father was running along with his team. Um, going to events, watching events be put together, and events could be anything from cultural events where, artists, musicians, playwrights, poets, etc., whatever, spanning the gamut of artistry, um, you know, would participate and perform in these things, from things like that to informational things, what I'm saying, like watching the community center function in terms of like providing ESL and computer literacy courses, to doing taxes and helping with immigration filings and things like that. So yeah, man, community work, uh working on behalf and in service of your people was something that was 90% of the time that was spent outside of school when we were kids growing up, my brother and I.
Word.
That is a wildly different experience than virtually almost everybody I've talked to in any of the, not even just this show, anything in most of my life. Like, that's like, because it's not even like religious or anything. It's just truly like building up the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like,
Yeah,
and then you're part of that too. And you're just like in the middle of, and then in the midst of that, you're like listing all these real life skills that are like super useful shit that you're getting involved in since time. I mean, that's a super.
yeah.
I mean, it might have.
Let me ask you a question. Did your father happen to end up like assisting in his own like larger campaign for like a larger office, or like helping somebody else, or like on a campaign for like a larger seat in office?
Yeah. I mean, shit.
I
When I
asked that
was
because that usually like that type of like community right like activism leads to that, like it's helping,
right,
pretty sure, like some mayor or president, you know what I
man,
mean, like
speak,
benefited from your father.
preach on it, man. 100%. You know what I'm saying? Shit. If you go back in my ancestry, I actually got a couple of people, down the line who actually served as fucking president of the country of Haiti, in the late 80s, early 90s. My parents or my father and the organizations that he was involved in were instrumental in helping Jean-Bertrand Aristide ascend to the presidency, who was the first like democratically elected leader in Haiti's history post the dictatorships of Papa and Baby Doc, I should say. And, and even when he was in exile, I remember when I was about 12 or 13 years old, he had been exiled by the military coup that ousted him, and my father and his team, they organized an event where Aristide came and gave a speech to the people while he was in exile and deposed before going back to Haiti and then turning into a fucking scumbag who was fucking essentially like working at the behest of the fucking United States government, you know what I'm saying? And at which point like my father and his people's you know had lost love for the man, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? And
I'm
so
pretty
like
sure I was about to say retracted any and all cosigns, and we're like, yeah, we're not associated with that shit. Like,
yeah, what I mean?
originally
So
we all had a game plan
Man,
going
that's.
in. This motherfucker went
yeah,
left.
I think it's so cool that like you just know all this shit because it's like your dad. Like, I read books
yeah,
about this
man.
shit, bro, and you're just like, yeah, this is what we grew up with. My dad did that. I'm like,
Technically
Yo,
speaking, like you're a diplomat, right?
yeah,
Like, right?
I
Like
mean, I'm
family that
diplomat. I'm diplomat adjacent.
Adjacent. I was about to say diplomat adjacent. Yo, son, as long as you can get that motherfucking plaque, son, what?
That's
What?
hype though.
Start rolling through with the diplomat license
So
plate. Oh my
arguably,
god.
I can see what you mean now when you say that your life was a little bit different, because that's some like super different shit. That's so.
Yeah,
Anyway.
no, I mean, and you gotta like check it out real quick. Like that, there's a negative connotation nowadays associated with diplomats and with politics, right? And governance because of how much corruption we've seen across history, right? But like ideally, like it's like I like to tell people about like social media, right? Like a lot of people complain about social media being like negative. And or like I seen one time Saigon speaking on an interview saying that like IG was nothing but tits and ass. And I'm like, no, sir, it's not. It's a
not,
tool.
right.
It's a tool.
Right.
It's that you're following all these people that are showing tits and ass. If you stop
100%.
following tits and ass and you just start following a bunch of realtors, your IG feed will now become nothing but realty education. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
right.
because you're choosing to use this tool in this way, it is now that, and it has that negative connotation, right? So like politicians and diplomats and people in position of governance, these aren't supposed to be a negative stereotype. It's just that there's been so many throughout history that people kind of get this idea in their head. But ideally, anybody who's like in a place of governance is usually put there by the people because the people believe this to be a person that can help them to a better place. You know what I mean?
Correct.
So like,
also, I mean, just because there's a lot of bad politicians, I don't think history ever really focuses enough on the good politics. Like, it's just there. Like politics is just there, but there's a lot of like good people in it, or like they're just really not documented because they often don't have egos, but they're good at politics.
Right. Like the people behind the scenes who become fucking, attorneys general or something like that. But they don't, they don't seek office because even they have a kind of disdain for politics. You know what I'm saying? Or politics, if you will. You know what I mean? But it's interesting, man, as they say, like politics, power corrupts, right? As they say. And so, even the noblest of politicians got into it to a certain degree because of what kind of like liberties or deference that they'd be afforded as a result of their position. You know what I'm saying? And so, it's the like what Holden said. I think those examples of those good-natured and good-hearted politicians, I think, I think I would probably say are the majority, are in the majority, but they're not the loudest voices that you typically hear in the room. You know what I'm saying? And when you think about it, right, like to become or to aspire to something like the presidency of a place, of a country, right? Like you got to be a little bit batshit fucking crazy. Right?
Yeah, you do.
You gotta be, you know what I'm saying? You gotta be like a little bit egomaniacal. You know what I'm saying? You gotta be a little bit fucking batshit crazy. I think there's a certain level of naivete and fucking ignorance that comes along with that shit too.
Or a strong amount.
Right. You know what I'm saying? But definitely you gotta be on your own dick. You know what I'm saying? If you thinking like, yo, nigga, I could be president of something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or of anywhere,
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who said to me that like, there's nobody that like gets to the presidency without getting dirty and filthy. You know what I mean? And it's just like, so it's natural that like once you are president, like you're no longer a good person. Like if you were ever a good person and that's why you were running, by the time you get to the presidency, you done did so much dirt that it's like that good shit is
deal with so
gone.
much
Like
shit. Yeah, bro.
you're not the
just
good
yeah,
guy
like,
you once were. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's just like,
Right.
and then you
Or
have
like,
to do so much dirt as the right. Like it's like the presidency leadership always entails so much. Somebody's gonna get the shaft at the end of the day.
facts.
Somebody
That's a fact.
you're gonna make sure that somebody's taken care of and that somebody's getting fucked up.
Somebody getting shit on. Word.
And in that you're always gonna be doing bad. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
you're always gonna be, you know, just a pig in shit as a president. You know, like
That's a fact, yo. That's a fact.
no, that makes a lot of sense.
But you know, I mean, look, even if you take like somebody like Aristide, right? Um, Roman Catholic priest elected with like 99 fucking 0.9% of the fucking vote. You know, swept into power by a wave of anti-corruption, you know, and just like nobility, you know what I'm saying? Not nobility in terms of where he came from, but nobility in terms of his intentions, right? And so he ascends to the fucking presidency. He gets deposed by the fucking coup, and then ultimately like gets put back in power, you know, with shackles on. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, like, you know, the United States doesn't help you get back into something like a presidency or back into power without being like, well, you know, we'll do this for you. So what are you gonna do for us? And so obviously
yeah, no, absolutely.
your
Yeah.
politics change along whatever lines though, you know, those are, you know, dictated to you, if you will. But yeah, man. So that's you know, that's what I was around. Protest, struggle, you know what I'm saying? Like the fight for right, things like that. That's what was going on in my world, you know what I'm saying, when I was a kid coming up.
All right, so then you discover protest music at like 10. That's wild. We're like this deep in. We got all kinds of history lessons, and you're like now 10. That's a dope start. I'll fucks with that.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it was good times, I guess.